I own this city. Gavel means nothing. Dismiss it or kiss my ass.
Say that again, and I will dismantle everything you are, own, and hide.
The courtroom didn't just fall silent. It felt as though the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the room, leaving a pressurized void that made the eardrums of every spectator throb. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster, a moment where time slows down, and you can hear the frantic ticking of a luxury watch against the steady rhythmic pulse of a judge who has seen it all. In her 40 years on the bench, Judge Judy had stared down gang leaders, white-collar criminals, and professional con artists, but she had never encountered a brand of arrogance as toxic as that of Marcus Thorne. Marcus, a 30-year-old real estate mogul who had inherited a $300 million portfolio before he even learned to tie his own shoes, stood at the defendant's podium with a smirk that could only be described as predatory. He didn't just look like he owned the courtroom. He looked like he was contemplating buying the building just so he could tear it down for a parking lot. But here is the secret that would eventually send shockwaves across the internet and leave the legal world gasping for air. Marcus Thorne had just made a mistake so catastrophic, so fundamentally stupid, that it wouldn't just cost him this lawsuit, it was about to dismantle his entire empire. He thought he was there to argue about a $5,000 debt to an old man, but he was actually walking into a trap that Judge Judy had been silently baiting since the moment the bailiff called his name. Before the first word of testimony was even spoken, the tension was already at a breaking point. On the other side of the aisle sat Mr. Henderson, a 78-year-old veteran whose hands were trembling so violently he had to tuck them under his worn, tweed jacket just to maintain a shred of dignity. Mr. Henderson wasn't just a plaintiff. He was a man whose life's work, a small, independent hardware store that had served the community for 50 years, had been systematically crushed by Thorne's corporate greed. The contrast was sickening. The polished, dark navy suit of a billionaire's son versus the fraying sleeves of a man who had spent his life in honest labor. The audience felt a collective wave of righteous fury, a primal urge to see the scales of justice tipped back into balance. If you are sitting there right now feeling that same fire in your chest, if you believe that no amount of money should ever allow a bully to walk over the vulnerable, then you need to hit that subscribe button immediately. We are uncovering the most satisfying courtroom destruction in history, and you owe it to yourself to see the exact moment the alpha realizes he's nothing more than a common thief in a designer tie. Smash that like button if you're ready for the truth to come out, because what Marcus Thorne is about to say will make your blood boil, but what Judge Judy does in response will restore your faith in the power of the law. The case began with a deceptive simplicity. Judge Judy opened the file, her eyes scanning the documents with a terrifying speed that suggested she was already 10 steps ahead of everyone in the room. She didn't look at Marcus, she looked at the evidence. The claim was for $5,000, the maximum allowed in small claims court, stemming from a series of consultation fees that Marcus had allegedly promised to pay Mr. Henderson for his expertise in local historical zoning laws. Marcus's father had wanted to build a luxury high-rise on the site of an old landmark, and they needed Mr. Henderson to sign off on certain community easements. Mr. Henderson did the work, spent hundreds of hours in the archives, and saved the Thorne Group millions in potential legal fees. But once the permits were signed, Marcus Thorne did what people like him always do. He stopped answering the phone. He treated a veteran's time and labor like a discarded wrapper, assuming that a man with no resources would never have the audacity to drag a Thorne into court. As Judy began to question Marcus, he didn't even have the decency to stand up straight. He leaned on the podium, checking his reflection in the glass of his gold-rimmed watch, his voice dripping with a casual, bored condescension that made the bailiff's hand twitch toward his belt. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Judy began, her voice a low, dangerous hum, "Mr. Henderson has provided 12 months of call logs, 35 detailed architectural reports, and a signed memorandum of understanding. Your defense, as I understand it from this pathetic scrap of paper you called a brief, is that you didn't feel the work was worth the agreed-upon price. Is that the extent of your legal genius?" Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound that was more of a bark than a giggle. He looked at the gallery, seeking an audience for his performance. "Look, Judge," he said, waving a hand dismissively toward the elderly man, $5,000 is what I spend on a Tuesday lunch. This isn't about the money. It's about the principle. This guy is a relic. He's trying to grift a successful businessman because he knows my father's name is on half the buildings in this zip code. I didn't pay him because his reports were basically fairy tales. He should be thanking me for even letting him sit in the same room as me. The silence that followed was that nuclear silence mentioned before. Judge Judy didn't snap. She didn't yell. She slowly lowered her glasses, her blue eyes piercing through Marcus like a laser through wet paper. She let the arrogance of his statement hang in the air, allowing every person in the room to digest the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his words. Marcus, misinterpreting her silence as submission, leaned in further. He thought he was winning. He thought he had intimidated the most famous judge in America. He didn't realize that in Judge Judy's world, a smile is often the most dangerous weapon she possesses. She looked at Mr. Henderson, whose eyes were welled with tears of pure humiliation, and then she looked back at Marcus. You think you're very clever, don't you, Mr. Thorne? You think that because you've never had to work for a single thing in your life, the rules of contract and decency don't apply to you. Marcus shrugged, a small, ugly smirk playing on his lips. I think I own the scoreboard, Judge. And on my scoreboard, I don't owe this old man a dime. It was at this exact second that Marcus uttered the words that would go viral within the hour, the words that would lead to a reaction so unreal, it left the entire production crew in shock. He leaned over, lowered his voice to a growl, and said, Matter of fact, Judge, why don't you just do your job and dismiss this? Or better yet, kiss my A** and I'll buy you a nicer robe. The camera cut to Judy. She didn't blink. She just whispered, Thank you, Mr. Thorne. You've just given me everything I needed. As Marcus Thorne settled into his seat after his initial outburst, the courtroom felt like it was simmering on the edge of a violent boil. To understand how we got to the moment where a billionaire's son would scream an obscenity at the most respected judge in the country, you have to understand the sheer level of entitlement that Marcus brought with him through those double doors. He didn't just walk, he strutted, flanked by a high-priced legal consultant who looked more like a bodyguard for a pop star than an officer of the court. Marcus had spent his entire life in a world where no was a word used only for other people. He lived in a penthouse that overlooked the very streets Mr. Henderson had walked for nearly 80 years, yet he looked at the elderly veteran as if he were a glitch in a computer program, something to be deleted and forgotten. The gallery watched in a mixture of awe and revulsion as Marcus adjusted his silk tie, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he was standing in a place where his father's checkbook held no sway. Mr. Henderson, by contrast, was the living embodiment of a fading era of American integrity. He spoke with a quiet, gravelly voice that commanded respect not through volume, but through the weight of his history. He explained to the court that his hardware store wasn't just a business, it was a community hub. He had the blueprints, the zoning maps, and the historical records that the Thorne Group desperately needed to break ground on their Thorne Legacy Towers. Mr. Henderson hadn't sought out Marcus. Marcus had come to him, hat in hand, promising that the Thorne family takes care of their own. But once the elderly man had handed over the keys to the city's history, information that allowed Marcus to bypass millions of dollars in environmental impact fees, the care vanished. Marcus didn't just refuse to pay the $5,000 fee. He began a campaign of harassment to force Mr. Henderson out of his shop entirely, wanting to seize the land for a private valet entrance. Judge Judy began to peel back the layers of this corporate onion with the precision of a surgeon. She directed her attention to a specific set of emails that Marcus had tried to have suppressed before the trial began. These weren't just business communications, they were a roadmap of malice. In one email, Marcus had joked to his associates about waiting for the old man to kick the bucket, so they wouldn't have to honor the contract. When Judy read this aloud, a collective gasp rippled through the room. It was the kind of cold-blooded cruelty that makes your skin crawl, the type of behavior that proves some people view the elderly not as treasures of experience, but as obstacles to profit. Marcus, however, didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed that his private jokes were being made public. He rolled his eyes, sighing loudly as if the judge were wasting his precious time with trivial matters like human decency or the law. The trial took a darker turn when Judy brought up the incidental damages. It wasn't just about the $5,000 anymore. Mr. Henderson's shop had been vandalized 3 times in the month leading up to the lawsuit. Expensive plate glass windows smashed and condemned stickers placed on his doors by mysterious inspectors, who didn't work for the city. While Marcus maintained a mask of innocence, his body language told a different story. Every time the vandalism was mentioned, he leaned back and smirked, a silent admission of power that he thought couldn't be proven. He was playing a game of catch me if you can, convinced that his digital tracks were wiped clean and his father's lawyers had built a wall of fire around his reputation. He didn't realize that Judge Judy doesn't just look at the evidence presented. She looks at the soul of the person standing in front of her. As the second hour of the proceedings began, the power dynamic in the room started to shift in a way that Marcus was too blinded by his own ego to notice. Judy was no longer asking questions about the contract. She was asking about Marcus's personal holdings, his shell companies, and his recent charitable donations. Marcus thought he was being interrogated by a simple civil judge, but he was actually being audited by a legal genius who had detected a scent of blood in the water. He was so busy trying to look superior that he didn't see the trap closing. He was standing on a trapdoor of his own making, and the "kiss my a** comment he was about to deliver wasn't just an insult, it was the moment he pulled the lever himself. The courtroom was about to witness a transformation. The hunter was becoming the prey, and the old man he mocked was about to become the reason his entire world came crashing down. The air in the courtroom had reached a state of static electricity so intense that you could almost see the sparks flying between the two podiums. Judge Judy, having already dismantled Marcus Thorne's defense regarding the contract, was now moving into the phase of the trial that seasoned viewers recognize as the closing of the net. She wasn't just looking at the unpaid $5,000 anymore, she was looking at the fraudulent business practices that Marcus had used to keep people like Mr. Henderson under his thumb. She held up a document, a bank statement Marcus had submitted as proof of his inability to pay certain overhead costs. Her eyes flickered over the numbers with a cold, predatory focus. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dropping an octave into a register that signaled imminent danger, "you claim here that your primary development fund was depleted, yet I see a wire transfer for $200,000 to a luxury car dealership in Miami on the exact same day you told Mr. Henderson you couldn't afford his $5,000 fee. Are you naturally this allergic to the truth, or do you have to practice in front of a mirror?" The gallery erupted in a low murmur of shock. Marcus's face, previously a mask of bored superiority, flashed a shade of crimson that matched his silk pocket square. He gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. He wasn't used to being interrogated by someone who could see through his financial smoke and mirrors. He looked toward his consultant, but the man was staring at the floor, realizing that the Thorne name was no longer a shield in this room. If you're watching this and you've ever seen a corporate shark realize they've walked into a cage with a bigger predator, you know exactly how satisfying this moment is. This is why we do what we do, to show that no one, no matter how many commas are in their bank account, is above the law. If you want to see more bullies like Marcus get their ego shredded on national television, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now. Your support helps us bring these stories of accountability to the world, and trust me, the next 2 minutes of this trial are something you will be telling your friends about for a week. Comment "truth" below if you think Judge Judy is the only one who can handle people like this. Marcus finally snapped. The pressure of being exposed, the humiliation of having his private spending habits read aloud, and the sight of Mr. Henderson sitting there with a look of quiet hope finally broke his carefully cultivated composure. He didn't just raise his voice, he screamed. "Who do you think you are?" he bellowed, leaning so far over the podium that the bailiff instinctively took a step forward, hand hovering over his holster. "I'm a Thorne. We built this city. My father has judges on his payroll who make you look like a traffic warden. I don't owe this old fossil a single cent, and I certainly don't owe you an explanation for how I spend my money." The courtroom went deathly quiet. Even the cameras seemed to freeze. But Marcus wasn't done. The adrenaline of his own arrogance was fueling him now, pushing him past the point of no return. "Matter of fact," he continued, his voice trembling with a terrifying blend of rage and entitlement, "why don't you take your little gavel and your little show and kiss my a***? Dismiss this case or I'll make sure you never sit on a bench again." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It was the kind of silence that occurs right after a bomb goes off, before the sound of the debris hitting the ground begins. Mr. Henderson looked horrified, his hands shaking even harder now, not out of fear for himself, but out of shock at the sheer disrespect shown to the court. The audience was paralyzed. No one had ever spoken to Judge Judy like that and walked out with their dignity intact. Judge Judy didn't move a muscle. She didn't bang her gavel. She didn't even blink. She just sat there, staring at Marcus as if he were a particularly interesting specimen of bacteria under a microscope. For 30 long agonizing seconds, the only sound in the room was the heavy, ragged breathing of Marcus Thorne, who was slowly beginning to realize that the nuclear option he had just triggered was going to vaporize his own life, not the judge's. He looked around, expecting someone to cheer for his bravery, but all he saw were looks of pure disgust. Judy slowly reached for her pen, a small, icy smile spreading across her face, the kind of smile that a lioness gives to a gazelle that has just tripped. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice eerily calm, "you didn't just lose this case. You just opened a door that you are going to wish stayed locked for the rest of your life." What she did next was so unreal that it would lead to a federal investigation that changed the landscape of the city's real estate forever. The silence that followed Marcus Thorne's vitriolic, "Kiss my A**** outburst wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating blanket of shock that paralyzed everyone from the front row spectators to the camera operators in the rafters. Marcus stood there, chest heaving, a vein throbbing in his temple like a live wire. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and wild, waiting for the laughter or the submission he had been conditioned to expect his entire life. He had spent 30 years buying his way out of consequences, assuming that every person had a price and every law had a loophole. But as he stared into the unblinking glacial eyes of Judge Judy, the first flicker of true primal terror began to take root in his gut. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his existence, that he wasn't looking at a judge he could intimidate. He was looking at a mirror reflecting the ugly reality of his own soul. Judge Judy slowly picked up her pen. The scratching of the nib against the paper sounded like a series of gunshots in the quiet room. She didn't look up at Marcus. She spoke to the court reporter, her voice devoid of emotion, which made it 10 times more terrifying. "Let the record reflect," she began, "that the defendant has not only admitted to the existence of undisclosed liquid assets but has also demonstrated a level of contempt for this court that transcends mere insolence. Mr. Thorne, you believe that because this is a small claims venue, my power is limited to a $5,000 judgment. You believe you can walk out of here, pay the fine with the loose change in your pocket, and continue your path of destruction against people like Mr. Henderson." She finally looked up, and the intensity of her gaze made Marcus visibly flinch. "You're wrong. You are catastrophically, monumentally wrong." She turned her attention to the thick folder of evidence Mr. Henderson had provided, evidence that Marcus had dismissed as fairy tales. "Mr. Thorne," Judy continued, "while you were busy insulting me, I was busy reviewing the community impact clause in the contract you signed with the city to get your building permits. A clause that Mr. Henderson, in his infinite wisdom and decades of experience, ensured was ironclad. By admitting that you withheld payment for his historical consulting, you haven't just breached a personal contract. You have invalidated the historical preservation certification for your entire Thorne Legacy Towers project. That certification was the only thing preventing the city from taxing your property at its full, non-exempt commercial rate." The color drained from Marcus's face so rapidly he looked like a ghost standing in a designer suit. The smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure disbelief. He tried to speak, but his throat had tightened into a knot. Judy didn't give him a chance to recover. "This court is now finding for the plaintiff in the maximum amount of $5,000 plus interest," she snapped, "but that is the least of your concerns. I am officially forwarding the transcripts of this session, including your admission of hidden offshore wire transfers and your blatant attempts to defraud a municipal historical board, to the district attorney's office and the state tax commission. You came in here to save $5,000. By the time the city is finished reassessing your property and the IRS is finished with your Miami car dealership expenses, this afternoon is going to cost you closer to $150,000 in back taxes and legal penalties." Marcus's consultant finally found his voice, stepping forward with a hand raised in a desperate plea. "Your Honor, surely we can." Judy's gavel finally hit the wood, a crack that echoed like a thunderbolt. "Sit down," she barked. "Your client decided to turn this courtroom into a locker room. He decided to treat a man who fought for this country like a doormat. He wanted to be the alpha in the room? Well, now he can lead the pack in a federal audit." She turned back to Marcus, who was now trembling so violently that he had to grip the podium to stay upright. The "kiss my A*** bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a small, broken man who realized that his family name was now a liability, not an asset. The gallery, which had been holding its breath for what felt like hours, let out a collective sigh of relief. This was the moment of satisfying destruction that every viewer craves, the moment where the bully's own weapons are turned against him. Judy looked at Mr. Henderson, who was watching Marcus with a look of profound pity rather than triumph. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice softening for the first time, "you are a man of character. You provided this man with the truth and he threw it back in your face. The law will now provide you with justice. As for Mr. Thorne, he is about to learn that when you tell a judge to kiss your A***, you better make sure you aren't standing on a trapdoor. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Thorne to the clerk's office to begin the process of his financial unraveling." As Marcus was led away, his designer shoes scuffing the floor, he looked back at the bench one last time, but Judy was already opening the next file, his existence already a closed chapter in her book of justice. The doors of the courtroom didn't just close behind Marcus Thorne, they seemed to seal a tomb on the version of the world he thought he controlled. As the heavy oak portals clicked shut, the atmosphere in the room underwent a physical transformation. The jagged, electric tension that had defined the last hour dissipated, replaced by a profound, reverent stillness. Judge Judy sat back in her chair, the high-backed leather framing her not just as a legal arbiter, but as a guardian of a moral standard that many fear is disappearing from modern life. She didn't look triumphant. She looked resolved. She looked like a woman who had just performed a necessary, albeit grueling surgery on the body of justice. Marcus Thorne had entered that room believing his wealth was a suit of armor. He left realizing it was merely a target. If you are sitting there right now, feeling that incredible rush of satisfaction that comes when a bully finally hits a wall they can't climb over, then you understand why this video is so important. We live in a world where it feels like the Marcuses of the world win every single day. But today in this room they lost. If you believe that character should always weigh more than a bank account, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. We are building a community of people who refuse to let arrogance go unchecked. Comment, accountability, below if you want to see more moments where the truth actually matters. By subscribing, you're making sure that stories of real heroes, people like Mr. Henderson, are never drowned out by the noise of the entitled elite. Judge Judy turned her gaze back to Mr. Henderson. The elderly veteran was still sitting at his podium, his hands finally still. He wasn't smiling. There was no gloating in his eyes, only a quiet, weary relief that the weight he had been carrying for 18 months had finally been lifted by the law. Judy's voice, which had been a serrated edge just moments ago when dealing with Marcus, was now soft, almost melodic. "Mr. Henderson," she said, leaning forward, "I want to apologize to you. Not for the law, but for the fact that you had to endure the indignity of that man's presence for so long. You served this country, you built a business with your bare hands, and you maintained your grace while a child with a checkbook tried to diminish you. In this courtroom your word is gold and his word is dust." She then did something that stunned the regular viewers of the show. She didn't just move on to the next case. She took a moment to address the cameras directly, speaking to the millions of people who would eventually watch Marcus Thorne's downfall. "Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks that a position of power gives them a license to be cruel," she said, her blue eyes piercing the lens. "Respect is not something you buy. It is not something you inherit. It is something you earn through every interaction, every contract, and every word you speak. If you think that your status allows you to treat the people who built the foundations of your community like disposable parts, you will find that the law has a very long memory and an even longer reach." The aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind that the internet is still talking about today. The $5,000 judgment was paid within the hour, but as Judy predicted, that was only the beginning of the end for the Thorne Group's latest venture. The transcripts of the "Kiss My A** outburst and the subsequent admission of offshore wire transfers triggered a multi-agency task force investigation. Within 6 months, the Thorne Legacy Towers project was halted indefinitely. The city revoked the tax abatements, the IRS launched a full-scale audit of Marcus's shell companies, and the Thorne family name, once synonymous with power, became a cautionary tale of what happens when hubris meets its match. Marcus Thorne didn't just lose a case. He lost the very thing he valued most, his standing in the world he tried to own. As for Mr. Henderson, The $5,000 allowed him to repair the damage to his shop and install a state-of-the-art security system. But more importantly, the community rallied around him. After the episode aired, the old fossil that Marcus had mocked became a local hero. People stood in line for hours just to buy a box of nails or a hammer from the man who stood up to a billionaire and won. The hardware store didn't just survive. It thrived, becoming a symbol of resilience in a city that was tired of being pushed around by developers with deep pockets and shallow souls. The legacy of this trial isn't just about the money or the taxes. It's about the unreal reaction that restored a nation's faith in the system. It's about the moment we all realized that no one is too big to fall, and no one is too small to be protected. Judge Judy stood up, her robe billowing slightly as she prepared to exit. "Court is adjourned," she said firmly. As she walked toward her chambers, she didn't look back at the empty defendant's podium. She didn't need to. The truth had been spoken, the bully had been broken, and for one shining moment in a crowded courtroom, justice wasn't just blind, it was perfect. Thank you for watching until the very end. Remember, your integrity is the only thing they can't take from you unless you give it away. We'll see you in the next case.